You've probably seen the number. Maybe it was a headline. Maybe it was a chart someone posted, half bragging, half panicking. The average net worth in America is, and then a number that made your stomach drop a little. Because if you're like most people, that number didn't feel like a statistic. It felt like a verdict. It felt like someone had quietly done the math on your life and decided you were behind.
Here's the thing I need you to sit with for a second. That number was never designed to describe you. It wasn't designed to describe almost anyone watching this video. And by the end of the video, you're going to understand exactly why. And you're going to have a completely different number in your head. One that's actually useful. One that might make you feel, for the first time in a while, like you're not losing a race you didn't even know you were running. Welcome to Opulentia. If you're new here, this is where we take the confusing, anxiety-inducing side of money and break it down into something you can actually use. If that sounds like your kind of channel, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us keep making this stuff. Now let's get into it.
Let's start with the number itself, because I want you to actually see it before I take it apart. Depending on the year and the source, you'll see headlines claiming the average American net worth sits somewhere around $1.06 million. Take a second. Does that number match your life? Does it match your parents' life? Your coworkers? Your friends? For almost everyone watching this, the answer is no, not close. And here's where the anxiety kicks in. You start doing this quiet, cruel math in your head. You subtract your number from that number. You look at the gap, and you assume the gap is a measurement of how badly you're doing. But I want to make a claim right now, early, before we go anywhere else. That gap isn't measuring you. It's measuring a flaw in the question. You're partly right to feel confused by it. The number is real. It comes from real survey data. But you're wrong about what it represents. And once you understand why, you're going to stop letting that number run your emotional state. The barroom problem. Here's the analogy that makes this click for almost everyone, and it's one economists have used for decades because it just works. Imagine a small neighborhood bar. 25 regular people are inside. Normal people. Teachers, mechanics, a couple of nurses, a barista, a guy who fixes HVAC systems. Nobody in this bar is rich. Most of them have a net worth somewhere between $0 and $150,000. A few are in debt. It's a completely average slice of America. Now, the average net worth of everyone in that room is modest, reasonable. It tracks with how these people actually live. Then the door opens, and one of the richest people in the world walks in and orders a beer. Nothing about the 25 regular people has changed. Not one of their bank accounts moved. But if you now calculate the average net worth of everyone in that bar, the number explodes into the billions. Divided across 26 people, the average net worth per person might suddenly look like it's in the hundreds of millions. Does that mean the bartender is secretly wealthy? Does it mean the mechanic in the corner booth is sitting on a fortune? Of course not. Their lives are exactly the same as they were 5 minutes ago. But if you only saw the average statistic, without knowing one billionaire had walked in, you would draw a completely insane conclusion about that room. This is almost exactly what's happening at the national level. A relatively small number of extremely wealthy households, people with tens or hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, in assets, are sitting in the same statistical room as the rest of us. And when you calculate an average across the whole room, their numbers don't just nudge the total up a little. They drag it upward by a staggering amount, because the top of the wealth distribution in America isn't just higher than the middle. It's higher by orders of magnitude. The average doesn't describe the room. It describes the room plus the billionaire, smeared evenly across everyone, as if that's a meaningful way to talk about any individual person's life and progress. And here's the part that makes it worse. This isn't a one-time distortion from a single outlier walking through a door. It's a permanent structural feature of how wealth is actually distributed in a country like the United States. It's not 25 regular people and one billionaire. It's more like 25 regular people, a handful of people who are comfortably wealthy, a couple who are seriously rich, and then sitting quietly in the corner, barely visible in the crowd, a tiny number of households holding a share of total wealth so large it doesn't even feel like it belongs in the same conversation. That's not a rare freak event pulling the average up for one afternoon. That's the baseline every single year in every survey that produces these headlines. Which means the average isn't occasionally misleading. It's structurally, permanently misleading by design of the math itself, not by anyone's intent to deceive you, but simply because averages and skewed distributions were never meant to play well together.
Let's get slightly more technical for a second, because understanding this will change how you read every average statistic you ever see again, not just net worth. An average, mathematically, is sensitive to extreme values. If you have 10 numbers and 9 of them are small and one of them is enormous, the average gets pulled hard toward that one enormous number. It doesn't matter that 9 out of 10 data points are nowhere near it. The math doesn't care about 9 out of 10. It only cares about total divided by count. Now compare that to a different kind of number, the median. The median doesn't average anything. It simply lines everyone up in order from lowest net worth to highest and finds the person standing exactly in the middle. Half the people are below them, half are above them. That's it. The median doesn't get distorted by the billionaire walking into the bar, because the billionaire just becomes one more person standing at the very end of the line. Their extreme number doesn't get blended into everyone else's. It just sits out there, off to the side, not affecting where the middle actually is. This is why when researchers talk seriously about typical household wealth, the median is the number that actually matters. And this is also why the median net worth in America is dramatically lower than the average. Not because the data is wrong, but because the average was never measuring typical in the first place. It was measuring total wealth divided evenly, which is a completely different question. So here's the reframe I want you to lock in right now. When you see average net worth, mentally replace it with total wealth in the room, split evenly, including the billionaires. That's a much less flattering headline, but it's the honest one. So what's the number you should actually be comparing yourself to? Median net worth by age gives you a much more honest picture. And I want to walk through it by decade, because the shape of this curve tells its own story. In your 20s, median net worth is close to zero, and for a huge number of people, it's actually negative. Student loans, credit card debt, maybe a car loan, income that hasn't caught up to expenses yet. If you're in your 20s and your net worth is a small positive number, or even slightly negative, you are not behind. You are statistically completely normal. In your 30s, the median climbs, often into the tens of thousands, as people pay down debt, build a small emergency fund, maybe start a retirement account through work. In your 40s, the median generally moves further up, frequently crossing into 6 figures for the first time for the typical household, often reflecting a mix of home equity and retirement savings starting to compound. In your 50s, the median typically continues climbing as retirement accounts benefit from both contributions and decades of compounding, alongside built-up home equity. Notice something about this whole curve. It's a slow, steady climb. It is not a straight line to 7 figures by 30. It's not even close to the average number for most of these decades. And that's exactly the point. The median is telling you what actually typically happens to real households, not what happens when you blend in the tail end of the wealth distribution. If you compare your own number to the median for your age bracket, you get something the average could never give you, an honest sense of where you actually stand among people living lives similar to yours. But there's a second layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it's just as important as the age curve itself. The spread within each age bracket is enormous. 2 people in their late 30s can have wildly different net worths, one carrying debt from a divorce or a medical event, another benefiting from a stable dual income and an early start on a retirement account. And both of them are still, statistically, completely unremarkable.
Normal life produces a wide range of outcomes, even among people who are doing everything reasonably well. This matters because it's easy to slide from "I compared myself to a fairer number" straight back into the same old trap, just with a smaller, more precise-looking number to feel bad about. That's not the goal here. The goal isn't to hand you a new, more accurate stick to beat yourself with. It's to show you that the range of normal is much wider and much more forgiving than the single, terrifying average headline ever let on.
Now, here's where the picture gets even more interesting, because I want to show you just how extreme the top of this distribution really is, and why it distorts the average so badly. To be in the top 10% of net worth in the US, the threshold is well into 7 figures. To be in the top 1%, you're generally looking at a threshold in the range of $11 to $13 million or more, depending on the year and methodology. Read that again. The top 1% doesn't start at $1 million. It starts somewhere north of 10 times that. Which means the average net worth statistic, that figure hovering around $1 million, isn't describing some upper middle benchmark that a motivated person can realistically hit in a decade of hard work. It's a number that's being hauled upward by people who are, statistically, almost alone at the very top of the distribution. A shockingly small slice of the population holding a disproportionate share of total wealth is enough to drag the average for the other roughly 99% of households up to a level most of them will never see.
This is the part that should genuinely make you angry, in the calm, useful kind of way. Not angry at wealthy people. Building wealth isn't a moral failing, and neither is not having built it yet. Angry at the way this number gets thrown around in headlines and conversations, as if it's a reasonable target for a normal person's life. It isn't. It was never built to be one. It also helps to understand just how compressed the top of this distribution really is. Move from the top 10% to the top 1%, and the required net worth doesn't inch upward. It multiplies several times over. That's the signature of a genuinely extreme distribution, not a smooth, gradual ladder where a bit more effort each year gets you a proportionally bit further up. Wealth at the very top compounds on itself in ways that simply don't apply to the vast majority of households, which is exactly why blending it into a single average produces such a distorted picture of what's typical or even achievable for everyone else.
Let's talk about what this number actually does to people, because I don't think enough people connect the dots here. When you see a headline claiming the average American has over $1 million in net worth, and your own number is nowhere close, something specific happens psychologically. You don't think that statistic must be skewed. Your brain doesn't default to statistical literacy. Your brain defaults to comparison. And comparison against an impossible, distorted number produces a very particular kind of damage. First, it produces shame, a quiet sense that you did something wrong, or moved too slowly, or made bad choices, when in reality, you might be tracking exactly with or even ahead of people your age. Second, it produces a strange kind of paralysis. Some people, faced with a goal that feels impossibly far away, don't respond by working harder toward it. They respond by disengaging entirely. If the average is a number I'll clearly never reach, why bother tracking my progress at all? This is one of the quiet reasons so many people avoid looking at their finances altogether. Not laziness, but a defensive response to a number that felt designed to make them feel like failures. Third, and maybe most insidiously, it makes people vulnerable to bad decisions. When you feel behind a fabricated benchmark, you become more susceptible to catch-up thinking, chasing risky investments, taking on debt for lifestyle inflation, trying to shortcut a gap that was never real to begin with. None of this happens because people are irrational. It happens because they were handed a distorted number and told it represented normal, and nobody explained the statistical sleight of hand happening underneath it. There's also a slower, quieter cost that doesn't show up as a single dramatic moment. It shows up as an ongoing background hum of inadequacy. This is the version where someone doesn't have one bad night after seeing a headline. They just carry a low-grade sense that they're supposed to be further along for years, without ever tracing that feeling back to its source. It colors decisions in ways that are hard to notice from the inside. It can make someone reluctant to celebrate real progress because real progress still looks small next to an imaginary million-dollar benchmark. It can make someone avoid conversations about money entirely because those conversations feel like they'll only confirm what the headline already implied.
This is worth naming plainly. An entire ongoing emotional relationship with money, for a huge number of people, is being shaped by a statistic that was never built to represent an individual in the first place. That's not a minor technical footnote. That's a genuinely significant, largely invisible source of financial anxiety in modern life, and it's fixable the moment you know which number to actually be looking at.
Let me walk you through a composite example, because I think seeing this play out for one person makes it land differently than just hearing the abstract numbers. Jordan is 29, works a solid job, nothing glamorous, mid-level position, steady paycheck, nothing that would make anyone's LinkedIn feel intimidating. Jordan has about $22,000 in a 401k, roughly $6,000 in savings, and about $9,000 left on a car loan. No home yet. No investments beyond the retirement account. Net worth, when you actually do the math, lands right around $19,000. One evening, Jordan sees a headline. Average American net worth surpasses $1 million. Jordan does the mental math immediately. The gap between $19,000 and over $1 million feels less like a gap and more like a canyon. That night, Jordan feels genuinely low, behind, like something has been done wrong, even though nothing specific comes to mind.
Now let's redo Jordan's evening with the actual, honest numbers. The median net worth for someone in their late 20s is a small number, often close to zero, sometimes slightly negative once you account for the number of people still carrying more debt than assets. Jordan, at $19,000, isn't behind that median. Jordan is meaningfully ahead of it. Suddenly, the entire emotional experience of that evening changes. Jordan isn't a failure lagging $1 million benchmark. Jordan is a 29-year-old with no debt beyond a car loan, an active retirement account already compounding, and a savings cushion, doing better than a large share of people the same age. Nothing about Jordan's actual financial position changed between those two versions of the story. The only thing that changed was which number Jordan compared it to. That's the entire point of this video. The number you choose to measure yourself against isn't a neutral choice. It's an emotional decision disguised as a statistic.
There's one more layer to Jordan's story worth sitting with. In the version where Jordan feels behind, that feeling has real downstream consequences, even if nothing about the actual numbers changes. Jordan might scroll past the idea of increasing 401k contributions, because what's the point? I'll never catch up anyway. Jordan might feel a flicker of temptation towards some high-risk investment, promising to close the gap fast, precisely because the gap feels enormous and permanent. Jordan might avoid opening a budgeting app for another 6 months, because looking closely at the numbers feels like confirming a failure that's already been decided. In the version where Jordan sees the honest comparison, none of that friction exists. Jordan can look at $19,000 and feel something closer to what it actually deserves: quiet, steady confidence. And from that place, the next decision is much easier to make well. Maybe it's bumping the 401k contribution up 1%. Maybe it's simply not panicking. The financial facts didn't change. The decision-making environment did, entirely, because the comparison point changed.
You might be wondering, if the average is this misleading, why does it keep showing up in headlines instead of the median? Partly it's simplicity. Average is a familiar word, easy to calculate, easy to write into a sentence. Partly it's that a bigger number performs better in headlines. Average net worth hits $1 million, gets more clicks than median net worth is a fraction of that, even though the second headline is the more honest one. And partly, this is the uncomfortable part. A distorted, inflated average serves certain narratives.
It can be used to suggest the country is wealthier than it feels for most people, or it can be weaponized the other direction to make ordinary people feel like failures for not matching an artificial benchmark. Either way, the effect on the person seeing the headline is the same: confusion, dressed up as information. None of this requires a conspiracy. It's mostly just the natural result of a genuinely confusing statistic getting flattened into a punchy headline. But understanding the mechanism means you never have to fall for it again.
So, if comparing yourself to the average is a dead end, what should you actually be tracking? 3 things matter far more than any single headline number. The first is your own trajectory over time. Not where do I stand versus a stranger's statistic, but where was I a year ago and where am I now? Net worth isn't a single snapshot, it's a trend line. A 29-year-old moving from $8,000 to $19,000 in 18 months is demonstrating something a static comparison to a $1 million average could never capture: real compounding progress. The second is your position relative to median, not average, for your age bracket. This gives you an honest read on whether you're tracking with, ahead of, or behind people in genuinely similar circumstances. Not people 3, 4, or 5 standard deviations away from typical. The third is the composition of your net worth, not just the total. Debt-free with modest savings is a fundamentally different and often healthier position than a higher net worth propped up almost entirely by illiquid home equity or fragile paper gains. The number alone doesn't tell the whole story. What's underneath it does.
Here's what I want you to walk away with. That headline number, the one that made your stomach drop the first time you saw it, was never a verdict on your life. It was a mathematical artifact created by averaging together the finances of roughly the entire country, including a tiny sliver of people whose wealth exists on a completely different scale than the other 99% of us. You were never supposed to be measured against a billionaire walking into a bar. The number that actually matters, the median for your age bracket, your own trajectory over time, the health of what you've actually built, has been sitting there the whole time, quietly telling a much more honest and often much more encouraging story. You're allowed to stop measuring your life against a number that was never designed to describe it. Start tracking your own number instead, where you were, where you are, and where you're headed. That's the only comparison that was ever actually useful. I'll see you in the next one.